yet another edition of Cradle Bytes. This hopefully very quick video will go over what Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah's speech this evening was about. It was a much awaited speech because Lebanon has experienced 2 days of full-on terror. And during his speech, we were subjected to, the sonic booms of Israeli jets flying over Beirut in particular. So let's dive right in. The Nasrallah, Hassan Nasrallah, who spoke at 5 p.m. today for about an hour, opened his speech by talking about the remarkable actions of Lebanese people and people throughout the region, including leaders, etc. Thanked in particular the countries of Iraq, Iran, and Syria for opening up their hospitals to the overflow of injuries experienced in Lebanon on Tuesday and Wednesday when Israel detonated pagers and walkie-talkies that killed a few dozen people and injured thousands more. So he thanked these countries. He also thanked and sort of set a scene for us that maybe many people had not observed. But he said that yesterday was the biggest blood bank donation effort in Lebanon's history. People from all walks went to the nearest blood banks and donated their blood for the victims. He also talked about how bystanders, once they'd figured out what had happened with these detonations, were quick to grab the injured, put them on their backs, put them on their motorcycles, put them in their cars, and drive to the nearest hospital. So, this was a great, the Lebanese sentiment that he expressed for all the actions of people across the country on Tuesday and Wednesday. Was how Hassan Nasrallah started his speech. And then he dove right into it. He said, Israel has now crossed all red lines, all laws and norms. There is no ethical or moral direction or consideration whatsoever for their actions of war. He said the explosions went off in hospitals and pharmacies where medical personnel carry pagers. And of course, we saw and we spoke about earlier in Cradle Bytes the scenes of people in markets, street markets, and supermarkets, and offices and stores who had their pagers detonated, and the impact on civilians around them, including the children, etc., who had been killed. So Nasrallah said, look, they didn't use weapons of war. They used civilian devices to do this. And their assumptions were kind of horrific. They assumed that 4,000 pager devices will be distributed only to Hezbollah people. And he said that was not true. But in Israel's head, it tried to kill 4,000 human beings in 1 minute. Instant detonation of these devices, assuming all people would die, all Hezbollah personnel, which was not the case. And of course, it was not the case that everyone did die. Most people were injured. And then on the following day, on Wednesday, Israel continued its terror acts and, aimed to again kill thousands. And then he walked down the number. He said maybe 1,000, let's say, in a minute, because these were walkie-talkies, not as available or used by regular people, except maybe in certain industries. And he says, think about this. Israel basically wanted or sought to kill 5,000 people in 2 minutes without taking into consideration any constraints, where these people were, who they were, what was going on around them, none of that. It was basically, he uses the word, a massacre. These were 2 massacres conducted by Israel to add to the many massacres they've committed in this region. It's a war crime in and of itself, and a declaration of war, obviously, on Lebanon. But he says that God was merciful, and a number of the devices were turned off. Some were not even distributed yet. Some were at a distance from their owner and who remained safe. Many didn't do a ton of injury. And it basically prevented, whatever happened, basically prevented the enemy from achieving its 5,000 kill goal. Hezbollah has now formed a variety of committees, a technical committee, and other kinds to investigate these two terror attacks. He calls them unprecedented in the history of Lebanon and maybe even the world, using civilian devices to detonate in the thousands at the same time. He concedes that this was a painful blow. It was a painful blow to Lebanon. It was a painful blow meant for the resistance. And he says, but this is war and conflict. And he says, he sees and points out that the enemy has no consideration, that all weapons are on the table, that there are no red lines for it, that it will violate all laws and norms and humanitarian concerns to execute its massacres. And that the U.S., the West, and NATO are essentially with Israel, who, and they all collectively have the most advanced technology in the world. And maybe this is the way of their warfare now, which is horrifying. He says that Tuesday and Wednesday were difficult and bloody days for Lebanon, but these were also tests. He says they were a test for Lebanon, they were a test for the resistance, and he said they were a test for the supporters of the resistance. He believes the Lebanese will be able to pass these tests and hold their heads up high once again, that they will not allow these strikes to, he says, force us to the ground. We will become stronger as a result of this and what we've learned, and we will adapt and learn to confront coming dangers. And then he goes into this sort of 3-segment thing where he says, before anything, before just lamenting this or praising this or, analyzing this, let's look at the core. And he says this is something that the resistance axis always does for any of its operations, for any, when it develops any of its strategies. It looks to understand the aim of the enemy. So he actually goes deeper into this and says, why did Israel do this? What was its aim in doing this? So point 1 is that, we are now approaching collectively in this region 1 year since the anniversary of the Palestinian Resistance's Al-Aqsa flood operation, followed the next day on October 8th by the Lebanese front being opened. And this Lebanese front, he says, despite how other Arabs and maybe even other Lebanese and Westerners complain and mock and belittle, was very important. It has applied for 11 months very heavy pressure on Israel. And he says you don't have to look to the naysayers to understand this or to decide whether it's been successful or not. He said, look to the Israeli officials, current and past, in the security establishment, the military establishment, the civilian sector, in parliament, etc. They are saying that what has taken place in the north of Israel on its border with Lebanon is unprecedented in their history. That they are experiencing, these are Israeli words, not his, that they have experienced a historic defeat. That Hezbollah, moreover, is making strategic achievements along the way, whether it is to change the rules of engagement or to establish deterrence where there hadn't been any before, or to hit deeper into Israel's strategic depth than it had before, or to use new technologies and new munitions and new weapons, drones, rockets, anti-tank missiles, even anti-aircraft systems, that Hezbollah was making strategic objectives in its had attained objectives and made strides in its strategic achievements. They established a buffer zone inside Israel in the north of the country, which had never been done before. They've created a war of attrition, the likes of which Israel has never experienced before. They have helped degrade Israel's economy to such a large extent, create insecurities. And this is stuff we've talked on the Cradle podcast many times, to create fear in the enemy's population, who have many, thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands have left the country seeking other passports. Many people have lost jobs, businesses have shut down, industries lack the building blocks of what they need from imports because of Yemen's activities. There's an absolute exhaustion in the Israeli occupation forces. There is also a difficulty in recruiting more to fill the ranks when Hezbollah and other resistance groups kill Israeli troops. So he says, the Israelis, if you listen to them, the officials are saying, we lost the north. We've never experienced such a crisis before. And that's why Israel now, in this last week, has decided that it must go face this degradation that it has experienced in the north. If Hezbollah was not creating pain for Israel, it would not have this need at this point in the war to go to the northern front and face Israel. He says that Lebanon is one of the most important fronts of pressure, of constant pressure on the many battles Israel faces. It is also, he says, and happy to lend to the Palestinian resistance an important negotiating card that Lebanon's pressure on the Israeli military and the Israeli economy, on the Israeli civilians and residents in the north and settlers, has been a huge negotiating card for the Palestinian in negotiations on ceasefire talks. He also mentions, and he's still at point one, don't worry, there are only three, that Lebanon has, in the many months of this conflict, had many foreign intermediaries arrive here trying to force a separation of the Lebanese front from the front that Israel faces down in Gaza, to separate these two wars, these two conflicts, to calm the Lebanese front, to negotiate an out and an end to conflict on, and to strike a separate ceasefire in a sense with the Lebanese resistance, but they have absolutely failed to do this. And he says these strikes came within this framework. Israel is suffering and struggling in implementing and executing its war on Lebanon. So it went rogue in a way. I mean, it's run out of the kind of military tools that would ensure this doesn't blow up into a full-on conflict. So it went to sort of hit at the heart of Lebanon by going to people, by targeting people through innocuous devices. So the messages, he says that Nasrallah says that hours after the operation, the pager terror attack on Tuesday, messages were sent to Hezbollah by multiple channels to explain that the aim of this terror attack had been to get Hezbollah to stop supporting Gaza, or there will be more of these. And then they followed up with the attacks via walkie-talkies on Wednesday. And in effect, perhaps burning these channels, the ability for them to use these devices to strike terror in the future. So the aim was, in the first instance, was to separate the two fronts, to stop the battles in the north. Then Nasrallah says, our response collectively is we say to Netanyahu, who he names, Gallant, the Israeli defense minister who he names, and their government and their army and their society, that Lebanon's front will not stop until the end of Israel's war on Gaza. And he says, I don't understand why they're not hearing this. We have said this from October 8th, 2023, and we will say it again. We will not back down from this. You stop the war in Gaza if you want to stop the war in the north. The second point Nasrallah makes about Israel's goals in these terror attacks was that in 11 months, Israel has not achieved one single one of its goals in Gaza. So Israel has also now shifted a little bit in these operations to target a tacit goal of striking supporters of the resistance, to exhaust them, make them cry, make them pain, make them bleed, make them submit to exhaustion and demand an end to the resistance's fight. And he says, in this too, Israel failed completely. He says, you only have to see the families of the martyrs of this attack. You only have to see the injured hobbling out of hospitals everywhere, more than ever, more determined than ever, more insistent than ever to go to the front, the battlefront, and fight Israel themselves. So in fact, the Israelis in their terror attacks have galvanized the supporters of the resistance and really pissed off a lot of Lebanese. And we see this in the words of the Lebanese foreign minister today, who said that a response by Hezbollah to these Israeli terror attacks is necessary. You know, the Lebanese establishment, weak as it is and dependent on foreign powers as it is, has always tried to distance itself from what's happening between Hezbollah and Israel. In this case, the Lebanese foreign minister comes out and says, Hezbollah, it is necessary for Hezbollah to respond to this attack. And so that is even more, I think, of a loss for the Israelis in this. And then his third statement, Nasrallah's third point about Israeli aims, you know, when it carried out the terror attacks on Tuesday and Wednesday, is it was to strike the structure of the resistance. They assumed, he says, the Israelis assumed that every single one of these pagers and every single one of these walkie-talkies was going to end up in the hands of of Hezbollah's military personnel. But not only that, their high command. The Israelis thought that basically blowing up 5,000 devices over 2 days every one of them would kill a Hezbollah official, senior personnel, military commanders, etc. Nasrallah said, in fact, no, our older guys use our older equipment. And the new batches went not just to Hezbollah, it went other places too. So, you know, in fact, if this Israeli goal was to strike the structure of the resistance, they failed in this too. He says from the very start, from the very minute it happened, the command and control centers of Hezbollah were intact and operating right through till now. They have not stopped. The structure was not shaken. He says neither was Israel able to impact in its terror attack our readiness, our presence on the battlefield right now, nor our cohesion as an organization. Then he sort of says, look, the Israelis are stupid. He uses this word. They're stupid. They shouldn't even think about, you know, of doing things like this. They're technologically, they may be smart, but the whole world understands they're stupid now because they cannot even reach a single one of their goals. Their goals are being thwarted by non-state actors everywhere. So they're stupid, he says, because in 11 months, they haven't learned how to play this. And he says, you know, people are talking about escalation war, full-scale war already as a result of this. But everything they're saying about war breaking out in the north, it's important for us not to think that way. Our focus every single day is to understand Israel's every single goal, every single ambition, every single tactical move, and try to thwart it. So we will thwart this not by an all-out war. We will thwart it in a very wise and strategic way, which we see fit. And we will not discuss how that will be, obviously. He says, you know, what is Israel's goal when they turn to the north? You know, it's 3 goals related to Gaza, stated at the onset of the war in October 2023, have failed. They have failed to achieve any one of them. And now they've added one more goal this week to return Israeli settlers to the north. And he asks the Israelis, can you achieve this goal? He speaks directly to Netanyahu and Gallant and others in the Israeli establishment. He says, we accept this challenge of yours. To Israel, I say, you will not be able to return your colonist settlers to the north of your country. Do what you want. You won't be able to achieve this. Nothing else can return these settlers to the north other than stopping your war in Gaza. He says, in fact, everything you do, every escalation you do, your terror attacks, the way you ignore laws and conventions and humanity, in fact, on the contrary, ensures that even more Israeli settlers are displaced and ensures that they will never return. Then he calls out the Israeli commander of the North, and he refers to him as this stupid commander of the North is suggesting to establish a security zone in Lebanon's south. He says, and this is, I'm sure you guys have heard us talk about this numerous times on the podcasts. Nasrallah says, we wish they would do this. We wish the Israelis would send in their troops. He says, we're constantly hunting and looking for a single soldier or a single tank to hit over these 11 months. It has not been easy. They don't come close. He says, so please let them come. What Israelis consider a threat to us, we in the Lebanese resistance, in the Lebanese South, consider an opportunity. And he says, if you come into this so-called security zone you want to create or the stupid commander of Israel's northern territories has threatened to create. If you come into this security zone, it will become a trap. It'll become an ambush. It will become a hell for your army, your soldiers. You will find yourself, first and foremost, against hundreds and hundreds of Lebanese people that you wounded on Tuesday and Wednesday, who are even more excited for this confrontation with you. And he says, so you're making a mistake, but you can keep trying. He concludes by saying that what Israel did on Tuesday and Wednesday will be met with a firm response from where the Israelis don't expect. He says, we're not talkers, we're actors. You will see it. This will not be a hidden thing. That accountability will come, and the details we will keep to ourselves. So, folks, this was us for Cradle Bytes right now at the end of a long day here in Lebanon. Stay tuned for more of this tomorrow as we follow developments in a quickly heating up segment of West Asia. Thank you very much for watching.